Yesterday, we were blessed with some very surprising news, and I'm sure pretty much all of you have seen it by now, but I want to talk about it because it's just a wholesome, positive story I'd like to share. It's like they say, a smile a day keeps the devil away. So let's get together and keep that greasy little bastard trapped in hell a little bit longer. Prepare for some ear to ear grinning with this one. I'm going to inject nostalgia directly into your veins with a single word. I'm going to transport you 20 years into the past when you were still eating crayons and suckling your mother's breasts for nutrients. Smosh. Smosh is one of the oldest and most successful channels in the history of the YouTube platform. If YouTube was a foreign planet, then Smosh would be the primordial ooze from which all life began to evolve from. They were one of the first channels, really, to become like a content creation house online, as well as one of the first channels to make a career out of content creation online, specifically on YouTube. The whole idea of making a living through producing free-to-watch videos online was such a laughable concept. People shit on that idea more than the girls in Two Girls, One Cup shit on each other. It was something no one believed in, it was so outlandish, and for the time, no one thought could ever work. The closest thing there was to monetizing self-produced home videos was winning America's Funniest Home Videos with fucking Tom Bergeron's quirky ass making jokes about you. That was really it. Past that, the whole idea of making money through home videos it didn't exist. But then a little something magical called YouTube rolls around and Smosh gets on the platform in 2005 and immediately gets a ton of steam. They get viral videos. They become the #1 most subscribed channel on the platform and stay there for a very long time. They were a staple of the YouTube community and one of the first to actually monetize their content and paved the way for other very successful channels as well. Most notably Ray William Johnson, who I believe was like the first YouTuber to make $1 million just from like his content. And it really is, in a large part, thanks to Smosh kind of blazing the trail. So that concludes the lore dump I wanted to do just to bring you up to speed with what Smosh is and really how important it was to the YouTube ecosystem. And that brings us to today's topic. Smosh as a brand, as a channel, has not been in control of the actual founders for well over a decade now. The founders Ian and Anthony sold it back in 2011. And for the first time since 2011, they are now the owners of Smosh. This is a very rare thing to see. Usually when you sell your brand, your baby that you created, it's almost impossible to get it back. Take, for example, FaZe. FaZe founders have been very publicly outspoken about how little control they have over FaZe now, and there's really not a whole lot they can do to get it back. Their hands are tied and they're getting fucking slapped around internally. It is really no longer theirs. They don't have power there. When you sell your brand or you lose control of what you built, it's very, very, very rare that you get it back. At least not without paying fucking oodles upon oodles of doubloons, like well more than you ever thought would be possible. So to see them actually be able to buy Smosh back is extremely good, but also extremely shocking. I think they got extremely lucky that the people they bought it from, Rhett and Link, are also YouTubers. So they understand the space and most likely wanted to do what was best for the creators here because they themselves are creators. So it's just a really set of fortunate circumstances that allowed them to buy the brand back. And it's very exciting for a lot of fans of Smosh and just exciting in general to see the people that actually created something finally getting control of it back. Because again, that doesn't happen super often. Now, if you didn't follow any of these big headlines from back in 2011 or like 2017 with Smosh and all of these big moves internally, then you probably don't understand how they lost control. You know, it's not like it was a hostile takeover. It's not like it was a Pokemon card that they misplaced. They just lost it. Like one day they woke up and all of a sudden Smosh is no longer their brand. So I'm just going to briefly explain the timeline of how Smosh got out of the hands of the founders Ian and Anthony. Well, Smosh has changed hands a couple times over the last decade or so with who actually owns it. Because in 2011, Ian and Anthony, the founders of Smosh, sold it to Defy Media because they wanted to continue to build the Smosh brand, do bigger and better content, and just keep producing, very expensive stuff that they couldn't reasonably do themselves. So they sold Smosh in order to finance that. Now, for a lot of people, hearing that is always cause for concern because we've seen shit like that in the past, and it never usually ends up well. When you get into bed with a money vampires in Silicon Valley, you get your blood sucked like a tube of fucking Go-Gurt, and it's not pretty. But in Smosh's case, it actually did elevate their content. They were able to produce more, they had other channels, they were producing at a very high rate, and it seemed to be going well because Defy Media was footing the bill, all the way up until Defy Media ceased to exist and got buried 6 feet in the ground. They fucking went tits up quickly and collapsed, which means they were no longer going to be piggy banking the Smosh brand. This, of course, would be a very big headache and a huge problem for Smosh if they no longer had the financial backing of something like a Defy Media because, again, it wasn't something they could reasonably finance themselves, especially now with all the new jobs that Smosh had taken on and all of the new content they were producing. So they threw up the bat signal and a hero answered, and that hero was Rhett and Link. Rhett and Link came in and bought Smosh and footed the bill for Smosh in order to keep producing the content. So that's where Smosh has been for the last half a decade under the Rhett and Link umbrella, and also for the last 6 years, Anthony hasn't been home. In 2017, Anthony announced that he'd be leaving Smosh, citing that the content really wasn't tickling him creatively anymore. He wasn't super passionate about the direction Smosh was going. He felt that sketches were the backbone of Smosh, and he didn't really have the time, nor did Ian, to really produce sketches. Thus, it kind of lost its way, so he wanted to do his own thing on his own elsewhere to pursue his own creative adventures, so that's what he's been doing for the last 6 years. And yesterday, from out of nowhere, it was announced that Ian and Anthony, the band, is back together, and they just bought Smosh. So for the first time in over a decade, they've got Smosh back, and they will be doing more sketch comedy that they were known for back in the day. So I'm extremely curious to see how all of this goes and how Smosh pursues content creation going forward without the backing of huge brands and organizations like Defy Media and Rhett and Link. So very exciting stuff, honestly. Like I said, this isn't something you see often. Now, there's another thing I want to briefly talk about because it's something I've mentioned before that I think is just always very interesting. Smosh has been here since 2005, like I mentioned. All of the other channels from that era, like that 2005, 2006 era, aren't really around anymore. They've either moved on or stopped a very long time ago. Smosh is one of the few channels that really stuck with it, and it's played out very well for them. But this is something that I always find kind of sad. When you are too early to something that you can't actually live off it, right? I talk about this in regards to professional gaming a lot, because when I was growing up, professional gamers like Walshy and Halo 2 and all of that, they existed, but they couldn't make a living off of it. They weren't making the money then that they are today. They were too early to it. They set the table for everyone, but couldn't eat from it. They paved the way, but couldn't actually walk it. And I always find that super fucking sad. To be, inarguably, doing good content, good things, or be at the top level of gaming, like in esports, but just being there a little too early where the money's not there yet and the monetization model's not there yet, so you can't actually live off it, and eventually you have to give up that dream because it's not there yet. You were just ahead of your time. Smosh is a very unusual exception to that, where they were too early. There was no way to monetize their content. It wasn't even something people envisioned for the time. But they just stuck with it for so long out of passion that it eventually they got there. They eventually were able to make a career out of it, whereas the other big channels from their era, like What the Buck Show is usually the one I always talk about, they were forced to kind of stop because it was an expensive thing to keep doing for getting no money in return. What the Buck Show was a massive channel for its day. That channel was one of the top 5 most sub channels for the longest time, for quite a few years in the early days of YouTube. But by the time there really was monetization and you could actually make some money from YouTube, What the Buck Show had already kind of stopped producing content. And I just find that always very sad. And that's not the only channel. There's plenty of other examples, but that's usually one I go to because they stayed at like the top 5 most subbed category for a while, but just there wasn't money to be made there yet, so eventually it stopped. Whereas Smosh just kept going, and now it's a powerhouse. I know this whole rant and tangent isn't directly related to the topic of the video with Smosh being bought back, but it's something I want to mention because I just do always find it very sad to look back on those massive channels for their day and see that they stopped producing content because they couldn't make a living off it, thus they couldn't keep producing the content. Because it was just too early. Like, it just wasn't there yet. Whereas if those channels existed today, they'd be making an absolute fucking killing. So it's just always sad to see, like, people that were doing incredible stuff, but just doing it ahead of their time. So yeah, I just wanted to at least briefly mention that, even though it's not directly applicable to what we're talking about here. But yeah, anyway, I think this is overall, like, really cool stuff. Like I said, I'm excited to see the direction Smosh goes now. I want to see what they start making now that it's back in the hands of the two people who started it. So yeah, that's really about it. So yeah.